So today begins essentially a sermon series that I'll be doing throughout all of Lent, looking at sort of the spirituality of Peter and who Peter is, and what we can learn as he sort of evolves from today, when he's called as an apostle, all the way through until Easter. And sort of what does it mean to be who Peter is, and what does that have to do with us? So part of the invitation I want to bring you into is, as we talk about Peter and who he is, reflect on who you are and the ways which are similar or different. There's no right, there's no wrong, but we can see how God works in one person's life. It may help us see how God is working in ours. Make sense? So we should start at the beginning, because that's what the story is for Peter. This is really the beginning of everything. Peter's an interesting guy. And what I find most curious about this story is we in Christianity have looked at the story and thought of it as a miracle, right? This is a miracle story. Jesus comes in, he does this miracle, and then all of a sudden you get Peter, James, and John. Boom. Verse 3. We keep going out and we collect more. But if you step back and think about it, take away the framing of it being a miracle, it probably really isn't much of one, is it? I mean, the Old Testament prophet said he would heal, cast out demons, and proclaim himself the Messiah. He does none of those three in this story. John the Baptist said the one who is to come after me would heal, cast out demons, and declare himself a Messiah. He does none of that. And what he does do, well, somewhat impressive, isn't really all that impressive. He goes to a group of fishermen, he starts teaching. Well, anyone can get up and start talking in a crowd, right? We all know that from the internet. Everyone's got opinions about everything. Doesn't take much to go on YouTube and just start talking. Okay? So he gets out there and he starts talking. And then he has this fish miracle. But again, I would challenge, it's not really a miracle. My Uncle David, he's probably one of the coolest guys I've ever known. Really good dad, really good uncle. When he was younger, he used to make money every summer by taking folks around, because he lived up in the St. Lawrence area, St. Lawrence Seaway, Thousand Island region. He knew where all the good fishing spots were. And since he lived up there, he knew how the fish like to migrate around. So he knew any given day where the best place for walleye or pike or bass or whatever was. And he realized as a teenager he could turn a lot of money by taking other folks out and showing them where they were. Okay? He could have easily done this miracle. There were more than once I'd go up to my Uncle David and say, I have been fishing all day. I have caught nothing. He'd say, what are you fishing for? I say, I'm fishing for bass. He'd say, where are you fishing? I say, here. Da-da-da-da. And he'd be like, well, that's dumb. You should go over there. And I go over there, and by golly, I catch some bass. And I just started before I go out in the morning, ask Uncle David. It's not a grand miracle. It's not a miracle the prophets spoke of. It's not a miracle of the scriptures. But I think that's important, because it tells you something about Peter more than it tells you something about Jesus. It tells you that Peter's sort of desperate. I mean, think about it. Someone claiming to be the Messiah or preaching, that was all over the place. We know before Jesus there were at least 23 people who claimed to be Messiah. We know after Jesus we're probably in the 40s, 60s, somewhere like that, because of what Roman records tell us these things. Messiahs were a dime a dozen back then in Israel. Everyone and their brother had a Messiah. So that wasn't spectacular. Catching fish in a lake, not spectacular. And yet, Peter is ready to give his life over. But I think the question we should ask is, give his life over for what? We want to think of Peter being this very holy man who wants to give his life to, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. But at this moment, at this time, he knows none of that, right? What he knows is you got a guy who knows where the good fishing is, and a guy who can speak scriptures. We also know about Peter from later accounts in the Bible is that Peter's understanding of the Messiah is very different than Jesus's. Remember, Peter cuts off the ear. of the high priest's servant, because he's carrying a weapon. See, Peter was not signing up this day for what Jesus was talking about. Peter was signing up because he was desperate. Peter was signing up not for a theological revolution, not for the defeat of death, the devil, and sin. That's what he will eventually sign up for. But on this day, what Peter thinks he's signing up for is war. He thinks he's signing up for a revolution. He is finally fed up with the fact Rome controls his country. Everyone is under the military oppression of Rome, and he is finally done with it. And I think that's why he signs up with a person who knows where the good fishing ground is. Why? Because if you know your territory well enough to know where the good fishing ground is, means you know that territory really well, right? You know every hill, every valley, every mountain, every hideout, every cave, if you know fishing that well. And the thing you don't want to do is fight a war against someone on their home turf. We've learned that time and time again, right? Because whatever technology, whatever else you got, fighting someone on their home turf puts you at a disadvantage. Don't believe me? Talk to anyone who's an athlete. They don't like going and playing away from their own home turf. It's a lot harder to be the visitor than to be the home team, right? I think that's what Peter's impressed about. He goes, all right, I got a military commander who knows this area. We'll be able to fight a good campaign against Rome. I think when I see Peter on this day, you have a man who's desperately trying to feed his family, who cannot figure out how to do it under the oppression he's under, who's finally fed up and ready to die in some sort of suicidal war against Rome. And he thinks that's who Jesus is. Now, he's wrong. We all know he's wrong because we can look back. But see, Peter's this really imperfect person. He doesn't know the line between politics and religion, a line that, by the way, folks, that's hard. We're all headed into an election year. There's going to be a lot of folks with different opinions on where that gray line is between religion and politics. That's difficult. That's hard. Peter's just as lost as everyone else is on that issue. Peter, not the brightest guy. I mean, this doesn't seem like the best life plan. Go get yourself killed. But there is something about Peter that I do think is noteworthy. I think there's something about Peter, James, and John that's noteworthy on this day. And I think it's why they get called. Because you may ask, like, why did Jesus call Peter if he was just sort of this desperate man at a desperate time who had no clue what he was signing up for? And I think there is a quality that he looks for in Peter. The quality is hope. See, on this day, Peter was ready to fight a revolution because he believed that in doing so, he hoped to make the place he lived better. He believed somewhere deep down that whether or not he lived or died, he and his decisions could make the world at least a little bit better, a little bit nicer, a little bit more free. That's why he wanted to pick up the sword to fight. James and John probably very likely the same way. And I think that's why Peter steps forward. Because he has the audacity to hope. The willingness to hope. The willingness to believe that a person, a group of people, can get together and make their community, and by that, the world, a better place. And God knows when God encounters that sort of hope, that sort of love for their fellow human, that sort of wish to find a better land, a better place, not by leaving, not by exiting, not by, cutting the cord, but rather by engaging. That God has something to work with. Because where there's hope, there's an openness to the Spirit. So today, as we start the discussion of who is Peter, I have a question for you to ponder this upcoming week. The question I have for you, do you have hope? Do you have hope that you can make a difference? I don't really care what the difference is. On this day, God doesn't care what Peter thinks about the difference. He just cares that Peter believes in a difference. Do you have faith and hope that things can be better tomorrow than they are today? Things can be better for the next generation than they are today. Because it is that hope that brings openness of the Spirit to move us all towards a better day.